I faked my death for 2 years, using baby formula to create fake ashes. I never expected my psychopathic ex-girlfriend to taste them. She went completely unhinged on the spot. It's formula. He's not dead. Now, she's got me cornered, her eyes bloodshot. Playing dead for 2 years? This time, I'm locking you by my side for a lifetime. If you run again, I'll carve out your heart to keep me company. The altar or the grave, Leo? You have to pick one. Well, my name is Leo Hayes. At least it is now. 2 years ago, I had another identity. A side character destined to be torn apart by the hurricane known as Isabella Sterling. Anyone who's read that novel knows that getting involved with the heiress to the Sterling fortune is a fate worse than quicksand. She's beautiful, brilliant, and comes from an empire of old money. More importantly, she possesses a near-pathological obsession with and desire to own anyone or anything that catches her eye. As someone who woke up inside this story, I knew exactly how my chapter was supposed to end. I wasn't the male lead, the one who could match her intensity until the final page. I was just the tragic idiot in the opening act, a poor soul crushed by her affection to make the hero's eventual triumph look even better. I didn't want to die. Even more, I didn't want to live in that suffocating grip of hers. So I staged my own death. It was simpler than I'd imagined. A carefully orchestrated accident, a stand-in corpse burned beyond recognition, and a canister of ashes I'd meticulously crafted from infant formula mixed with a bit of lime powder. Watching her at my funeral, seeing her grief so profound it looked like she might burn the world down, I felt a shameful sliver of relief alongside my terror. I did it. I fooled everyone, including her. I escaped to this small city, thousands of miles from New York, and started living cautiously under a new name. Portland, Oregon. I found a forgettable job, rented a sun-drenched apartment, and even tried to start a new relationship. Her name is Chloe. She works at the flower shop next door and has a sweet smile, as constant as the city's soft, drizzling sunlight. She knows nothing about my past. To her, I'm just a quiet, gentle guy who's a little reserved. Being with her is easy. I don't have to be constantly on edge, second-guessing the meaning behind every look. Leo, these Korean barbecue tacos are amazing. You have to try one, Chloe said with a laugh, holding a taco dripping with savory sauce to my lips. I took a bite. The rich, smoky flavor of the meat exploded in my mouth, cut with a perfect spicy kick. This was what I wanted. An ordinary, simple life, warm with the smell of street food and normalcy. I put my arm around Chloe's shoulder, looking into her bright, sparkling eyes. The chill that my memories had stirred up seemed to melt away in the heat and noise of the food truck pod. Yeah, it's great, I smiled, handing her a skewer of grilled octopus. But just as I looked up, my gaze drifting through a gap in the bustling crowd, my heart seized as if gripped by an invisible fist. There, at the edge of the flickering lights of the food trucks, standing perfectly still in a fleeting space in the river of people, was a figure. She wore a designer dress, so expensive it looked out of place, yet it perfectly hugged a slender frame that radiated an intimidating aura. Her hair was a dark cascade, her skin impossibly pale. Her face was breathtakingly beautiful and just as chillingly cold. And her eyes were cutting through all the noise and distance, locked directly on me. Isabella Sterling. How could it be her? How could she be here? My mind went blank. The blood in my veins felt like it had turned to ice. The taco skewer fell from my hand, clattering onto the table. I didn't even notice the grease stain it left on my shirt. Chloe sensed my change. Following my gaze, she froze for a second. Leo, what's wrong? She whispered. Do you know her? I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat felt like it was filled with cement. Even breathing was a struggle. Isabella moved. Her heels, which probably cost more than my first car, clicked softly as she walked toward us, her pace unhurried and deliberate. The crowd seemed to instinctively part for her, like she was Moses and they were the Red Sea. The noise around her path seemed to fade, muted by her presence. Her face was a mask of calm. No anger, no surprise. Just a serene, predatory focus. A hunter closing in. It's over. The thought crashed through my mind like a thunderclap. She stopped at our table, completely ignoring Chloe, who was nervously halfway to her feet. Her gaze landed on my face, a gaze like poisoned ice, like an abyss burning with a dark fire. She tilted her head slightly, the corner of her lips curling into a faint, terrifying smile. "Darling," she said, her voice a soft purr that somehow sliced through every other sound, laced with a cloying, dangerous sweetness. "There you are." In the next second, she reached out a gloved hand. Her cool fingers gently gripped my chin. The pressure was light, but it carried an undeniable, absolute authority. Her nails pressed against my skin through the thin silk, sending a shiver down my spine. I was paralyzed, a statue of pure fear. The quicksand of my past merged with this moment, and a familiar feeling of suffocation drowned me all over again. She leaned in close, her warm breath ghosting over my ear, carrying her signature, hauntingly cold perfume. She licked her perfect red lips, her smile turning manic and satisfied, her eyes churning with a crazy love that was about to devour me whole. "This time," she whispered, "let's see where you can possibly run." Rewind 12 hours. New York City. The Sterling family's penthouse, in a room where the heavy blackout curtains were never drawn, shutting out the sun. Isabella was dressed in black mourning clothes, which only made her skin look as pale as parchment. On the table before her sat an exquisite white marble urn. Inside were the last mortal remains of her husband, Leo Hayes, or so everyone had told her. Today was the second anniversary of Leo's death. The room was unlit, save for the flickering candlelight that cast dancing shadows on her bloodless face and her bottomless eyes. She stared at the urn for a long, long time, so long that she seemed to become a statue herself. Then, slowly, she picked up a small, ornate silver spoon from the table beside it. The old family butler, standing watch by the door, saw her movement. A look of sheer horror crossed his face. He started to step forward to stop her, but one look from Isabella froze him in place. There was no human emotion in that gaze, only a desolate emptiness and an unshakable madness. She scooped up a small spoonful of the white powder. Her movements were as elegant as if she were performing a sacred ritual. She was going to eat him. She was going to make him a true, inseparable part of her forever. It was the most extreme form of possession she could imagine. The spoon moved slowly toward her lips. She parted them, ready to welcome the ashes inside. But the gritty texture she expected never came. Instead, her tongue registered something strange, fine-grained, with a faint, sweet, and slightly cloying taste. Like milk? Isabella froze. She frowned slightly, carefully tasting the powder again. There was no mistake. It was the taste of baby formula. The distinct, slightly metallic sweetness of a high-end, premium brand. In an instant, the heavy, grieving, suffocating atmosphere in the room didn't just crack, it shattered. Isabella's body went rigid. Her pupils contracted into pinpricks. And in the next second, she didn't scream or cry. She erupted into a peal of wild, hysterical laughter. Ha, 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 ha. Her laughter echoed in the vast, empty room, sharp, manic, filled with an unbelievable joy and a twisted excitement that came from being deceived. The butler and the staff outside the door trembled in fear. They had never seen their mistress like this. So unhinged. So insane. Isabella laughed, so hard tears streamed down her face. She pointed a trembling finger at the urn, her voice shaking with the sheer force of her emotions. "It's fake. It's all fake. You all lied to me. How dare you all lie to me?" She shot to her feet and swept the urn off the table with a violent crash. The white powder spilled across the priceless Persian rug, releasing a bizarrely sweet aroma. "He's not dead." Isabella's voice suddenly rose to a triumphant shriek. "My Leo, he's not dead. He dared to trick me. He actually dared to leave me like this." The grief and emptiness on her face vanished in a flash, replaced by a radiant, terrifying glow, the pure, unadulterated thrill of a predator rediscovering the trail of its prey. Her once lifeless eyes now burned with a raging inferno. It was possession. It was obsession. It was the madness of absolute certainty. "Find him," she commanded, speaking to the air, to the vast network of power she controlled. Her voice was cold and cruel. "Turn over every stone. I don't care what it costs. Find him for me. Leo, you just wait. No matter where you hide, If it's the last corner of this earth, I will drag you back. And this time, I'll build you the most beautiful cage, and you'll never, ever get away. She licked a stray grain of the formula from the corner of her lips. The gesture was unnervingly sensual, her smile both morbid and utterly content. It was as if she could already see her lost lamb, about to be brought back under her wing. A vast machine roared to life. The Sterling family's wealth and influence, combined with Isabella's burn-it-all-down determination, quickly uncovered the breadcrumbs. Leo's supposedly perfect plan to fake his death was, under her obsessive, thread-pulling investigation, full of holes. His new identity, the city he'd settled in, his general routine, even the girl, Chloe, who would appear by his side. All the data points led to this food truck pod in a sleepy city in the Pacific Northwest. And so, she had come, carrying 2 years of pent-up longing and anger at being deceived that had fermented into an even more potent obsession, and her pure, unadulterated, and absolutely non-negotiable love. Back at the food truck pod, Isabella's fingers were still clamped on my chin, the pressure increasing slightly, forcing me to look up into those eyes swirling with madness and satisfaction. 2 years for months and 18 days, she murmured, her voice like a lover's whisper that sent me plunging into an icy abyss. Leo, do you have any idea how much I've missed you? I wanted to pull away, to scream, to push her off me, but my body wouldn't obey. The fear of this woman, a fear rooted in my past with her, was etched into my very bones. I knew what she was capable of. I knew she had no limits. Chloe finally stood up, her voice trembling with fear, but also a brave attempt to protect me. "Oh, who are you? What do you want with Leo?" Isabella finally deigned to look at Chloe, her expression like someone noticing an ant crawling on their shoe, cold, dismissive, with a flicker of cruelty, as if debating whether to crush it. "Who am I?" Isabella laughed softly, her gaze returning to my face, her fingers tracing my jawline in a gesture of ownership. "Tell her, Leo. Who am I to you?" My throat was tight. I couldn't say a word. She didn't seem to need my answer. "I'm his wife," she said, answering her own question. The only woman permitted to exist in his life. Her eyes flickered down to where Chloe's hand had been on my arm moments before, and her gaze turned sharp as a razor. "As for you, whatever hand you touched him with, I wouldn't mind taking it with me." Chloe's face went white with terror, and she instinctively snatched her hand back. "Isabella." I finally found my voice, but it was raw and hoarse. "Let me go." "And let her go. She doesn't know anything. Let you go." Isabella looked at me as if I had just told the world's most absurd joke. She leaned closer, her nose almost touching mine, her warm breath on my skin carrying that unnerving, cold perfume. "Leo, from the moment I chose you, letting go was never an option." Her fingers slid down my neck, pausing over my pulse point in a possessive caress. "The game is over," she smiled, delivering her final judgment. "You've had your fun. It's time to come home." Without another glance at my look of despair, and ignoring the curious onlookers who were starting to gather, she gave a subtle nod to 2 large men in dark suits who had appeared silently behind her. They immediately stepped forward, taking my arms on either side. Their grip was like steel. There was no possibility of struggle. "Take him." Isabella turned, the hem of her dress making a graceful, merciless arc through the air. I was half dragged, half escorted behind her. I looked back one last time. Chloe stood frozen, her face a mask of confusion and fear. On the table between us were the cooling, half-eaten tacos that I once thought were the taste of freedom. The lights of the food trucks still twinkled. The crowd still buzzed with life. But my world had just been dragged back into that sunless, suffocating swamp named Isabella Sterling. The flicker of light was extinguished, and this time I didn't know if I'd ever find a way to escape again. I was escorted by the 2 suited men into a discreet but obscenely expensive black sedan. The moment the door clicked shut, it was as if the vibrant, free world outside had ceased to exist. The car's interior was spacious and lavish, filled with the familiar, cold scent of Isabella's perfume, a smell that made my stomach churn. She sat across from me, her legs crossed elegantly, her eyes glued to me. She scanned me from head to toe, like she was appreciating a priceless artifact she had just recovered. Her gaze held no joy of reunion, only a tangible, chilling possessiveness and scrutiny. "You've lost weight," she said suddenly, her voice flat, betraying no emotion. "But that's all right. We'll get you back on a proper diet. You'll fill out again soon enough." I leaned back against the soft leather seat, my entire body rigid, my fingertips cold. The shadows of my past rose like a flood tide. That feeling of being controlled, of being utterly powerless, was more suffocating than anything I had ever known. I tried to find the words to fight back, but my rational mind knew that any resistance would only feed her insatiable need for control. "Isabella," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "it's over between us. Legally, I'm dead." She let out a soft laugh. She reached over, her silk-gloved hand slowly straightening the collar of my shirt, which had gotten rumpled in the scuffle. The gesture was as gentle as if she were handling a fragile piece of porcelain, but the icy touch through the fabric made the hairs on my arms stand up. "The law," she arched an eyebrow, a hint of mockery in her eyes. "Where I'm concerned, I am the law. Leo, your life and death have never been up to anyone else, and certainly not some piece of paper. If I say you're not dead, then you are required to live, right here by my side." Her tone was utterly matter-of-fact, filled with a domineering certainty. I closed my eyes, unable to look at her insane, devoted expression any longer. I knew it was pointless to reason with her. Her entire worldview was binary. Things she wanted and things she didn't. Unfortunately for me, I was firmly in the first category, permanently branded as hers. The car glided smoothly through the city's neon-lit streets, heading toward an unknown destination. I had no idea where she was taking me, but it certainly wasn't back to my little apartment filled with sunlight. "That girl," she spoke again, her voice now tinged with a subtle coldness. "Chloe, was it? Works at a flower shop. Clean background, naive personality." My eyes snapped open, my heart constricting. She had already investigated Chloe. "What are you going to do to her?" I asked, my voice dry, laced with a tension I hadn't realized was there. My reaction seemed to please Isabella immensely. A small, satisfied smile played on her lips as she leaned forward, her deep eyes locking onto mine. "Nervous? It seems you had a very cozy couple of years." Her breath, cool and fragrant, washed over my face. "Don't worry," she said slowly, as if toying with prey caught in her grasp. "As long as she knows her place and never appears in your world again, I won't bother with a trivial little insect. But if you ever think about leaving me again because of her or anyone else..." She left the sentence unfinished, but the warning in her suddenly darkened eyes was terrifyingly clear. I had no doubt she would do something unspeakable if I crossed that line. This feeling of being checkmated, of having my weaknesses used against me, filled me with a profound sense of helpless fury. I was a fly caught in her web. The more I struggled, the tighter she would pull the strands. The car eventually turned into a private, gated estate far from the city center. We drove through a lush, manicured forest before stopping in front of a stunningly modern villa that exuded an air of impenetrable security. This wasn't any of the sterling properties I remembered from New York. It was clearly a new home she had acquired just for this occasion. Or rather, a new cage. The interior was the height of luxury, but it was cold and impersonal. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of a curated garden and a shimmering infinity pool. But I knew without checking that the glass was specialized. You could see out, but no one could see in. "Do you like it?" Isabella asked from behind me, a hint of anticipation in her voice, as if showing off a gift she had carefully chosen. "It's very quiet here. No one will ever bother us. You can rest and forget all the unnecessary memories you've made these past 2 years." She waved her hand, and the two men in suits retreated silently, leaving just the two of us in the cavernous space. She walked in front of me and raised a hand to gently cup my face. The fine silk of her glove was a cool, unnerving barrier against my skin. Her gaze was intense and adoring, as if she were admiring a perfect work of art. "Do you know how happy I was when I found out those ashes were baby formula?" she whispered, a twisted joy swirling in her eyes. "For a moment, I almost believed I had truly lost you forever. Leo, how could you test me like that?" Her fingers tightened slightly on my jaw, forcing me to meet her gaze. "But it doesn't matter," she smiled, a smile that was both pathological and deeply satisfied, tinged with an almost childlike cruelty. "You're back now. You're home with me. And this time, I won't give you any chance to leave." She leaned in, her warm breath caressing my lips, her voice a demonic whisper. "I'm gonna make you get used to this place, get used to my presence, get used to belonging to me and me alone, until your body and soul can no longer even remember the thought of escape." Looking into her eyes, which shone with a love so pure it was terrifying, I knew I had fallen back into the sunless swamp named Isabella Sterling. And this time, the web she had woven was tighter and more inescapable than ever. The nightmare of my past was repeating itself in a new form. And this time, it seemed even the option of faking my own death had been stolen from me. She took my hand, like a mother leading a lost child, and gave me a tour of every corner of the villa. The library, the home theater, the gym. There was even a massive greenhouse filled with hundreds of blooming roses. "All of this," she said, her tone casual but her possessiveness absolute, "is yours, and you are mine." Finally, she led me to the master bedroom. It was spacious and bright, furnished with impeccable taste. She had even thoughtfully provided the brand of aromatherapy diffuser I used to like and a few books by my favorite authors. If it weren't for the heavy door that required a passcode and fingerprint to open and the nearly invisible security bars integrated into the windows, it could have been a perfect sanctuary. "You'll stay here from now on," Isabella said, letting go of my hand. She stood at the doorway, the light behind her splitting her form into shadow and brilliance. She was the gatekeeper between light and darkness, and I was firmly imprisoned within her domain. "If you need anything, tell the butler. He'll get you anything you want. Except," she paused, her eyes locking with mine, "leaving." With that, she turned, and the heavy door swung shut behind her with a dull, final click. I was left alone in this beautiful cold room. Her scent lingered in the air, an ever-present declaration of ownership. I walked to the window and looked out at the perfect scenery. Sunlight bathed the lawn, warm and real, but it couldn't dispel the chill in my heart. I knew, from the moment I was brought here, that I was once again Isabella Sterling's canary in a gilded cage. The only difference was this time, I wasn't even sure if, deep down, apart from the fear and resistance, there wasn't a tiny, twisted part of me that felt a sliver of security in this absolute, domineering possession. After all, in the desolate swamp of my childhood, she was the first and only person to ever claim me so obsessively, so completely as her own. And that realization terrified me more than anything else. The heavy door clicked shut, and the world went silent. The room was absurdly luxurious. The plush carpet was so deep my feet sank into it. The air was filled with the clean, sharp scent of cedarwood, a scent I associated with her, subtle but pervasive, a constant reminder of where I was. I walked to the massive window. Outside was a perfectly manicured garden, and in the distance, I could see the calm surface of a lake, glittering in the sun. It was beautiful like a postcard, but it had the sterile, artificial feel of a place cut off from the world. I tried the window. It didn't budge. On closer inspection, I could see a fine metal mesh embedded within the glass. It was indeed a gilded cage. The first day passed in this opulent silence. No one disturbed me. Meals, exquisite enough to be from a Michelin star restaurant and tailored to my tastes, were delivered on time to a small serving table just outside my door by a stone-faced maid. My laundry was taken and returned, freshly pressed and scented with the same cedarwood, without me ever seeing who did it. Everything was managed with an efficiency that was both comfortable and dehumanizing. I was a precious object, perfectly maintained, my only function to simply exist. Isabella didn't appear. That didn't make me feel relieved. It felt like a sword hanging over my head, waiting to drop. Her silence was more unnerving than her aggression. It wasn't until the evening of the second day that she came. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red, casting a warm glow through the window that did little to warm the room. I was on the sofa, staring blankly at a novel she'd left for me, one I had genuinely liked once, when the lock chirped softly. She was here. My heart skipped a beat, then began to pound heavily. Isabella had changed into a silk house dress. The soft fabric clung to her slender figure, softening the sharp edges of her presence from the day before. In her hands, she held a small jade bowl from which steam rose, carrying the faint, sweet scent of medicinal herbs. "I heard you haven't been sleeping well," she said, sitting down beside me, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She held the bowl out to me. "A calming tonic. Drink it while it's hot." Her tone was as casual as if she were discussing the weather, as if the 2 years of separation and the dramatic chase had never happened. This assumed intimacy was more oppressive than any interrogation. I stared at the clear broth, unmoving. She didn't press, just watched me with those deep, unreadable eyes, a faint, cryptic smile on her lips. The air grew thick with a silent battle of wills. In the end, I was the one who broke. I knew resistance was futile. It would only provoke her into using more direct and likely more humiliating methods to get what she wanted. I took the bowl. The warmth of the jade seeped into my palms. The tonic tasted good, a subtle bitterness followed by a sweet aftertaste. It had clearly been brewed with care. As I drank, I could feel her gaze on me, an almost greedy look of appraisal and satisfaction. It was the look of a master watching a prized pet finally, obediently, taking its food. The thought made my throat tighten, and I nearly choked. "Slow down," she said, her hand gently patting my back. The light touch sent a jolt through me, and my spine went rigid. When I finished, she took the empty bowl and set it aside. Then, she took my hand in hers. Her fingers were slender and cool, a stark contrast to the warmth of my own. "I want to show you something." She led me out of the bedroom, down a long, carpeted hallway, into a room I hadn't seen before. When she opened the door, I saw a fully equipped professional-grade art studio. There was a large easel, shelves lined with every imaginable color of paint, and brushes of all sizes arranged in perfect order. An entire wall was made of glass, looking out onto the deepening twilight and the first stars. I froze. Painting was a secret love of mine, a small escape I cherished deep within myself, the only flicker of light in the swamp of my childhood. I had never told anyone, not even her. How did she know? "Do you like it?" she asked, watching my reaction. Her voice held a note of genuine anticipation. "You can spend your time here. I remember. You used to love doodling in your old textbooks." My heart felt like it was being squeezed. She even knew that? How much of my past had she secretly unearthed? A terrifying feeling of being completely exposed, with nowhere to hide, washed over me. She walked to the easel, picked up a charcoal pencil, and held it out to me. "Will you draw something for me?" Her tone was gentle, almost a request, but her eyes, locked on mine, held an undeniable command. I looked at her, at this studio tailor-made for me, at the pencil in her hand. This was another one of her tactics, a way to make me comfortable, dependent, to give me a purpose within this gilded cage, slowly eroding my will to leave. I remained silent, not taking the pencil. Isabella didn't get angry. She just took a step closer, her body almost flush against mine. She tilted her head up to look at me, her cool breath ghosting over my jaw. "You won't draw?" she whispered. Then she did something that made the blood freeze in my veins. She raised her hands, not to force the pencil on me, but to slowly, deliberately begin unbuttoning the front of my shirt. Her movements were languid, carrying an intimate, irresistible force. Her eyes, dark and churning with a possessive fire, never left mine. "Well then," she licked her lips, her smile turning sensual and dangerous. "Either you draw me, or I'll just have to leave a few marks of my own on you. Your choice." The third button came undone. The cool air hit my skin, raising goosebumps. Her fingertips grazed my collarbone, a subtle, proprietary touch. The pressure in the room was immense. I could hardly breathe. I knew she would do it. Her pathological love could manifest as meticulous care one moment and destructive madness the next. In her warped, terrifyingly pure world, love was absolute possession and control, with no room for deviation. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and finally surrendered. I reached out and took the cold charcoal pencil from her. Isabella stopped. A look of profound, radiant satisfaction spread across her face as if she'd just been given the most precious gift in the world. Gently, carefully, she rebuttoned my shirt, her touch as delicate as if she were handling priceless china. "Good," she murmured. She stepped back and settled gracefully into a cushioned chair nearby, striking a casual pose. "Then, you can draw me." I stood before the blank canvas, charcoal in hand, looking at her face so beautiful it was poisonous. And for the first time, I understood with chilling clarity. Habit is a force more terrible than violence. It was silently, insidiously, dragging me down into the warm, soft bed of her love. And a man drowning in a swamp will sometimes, shamefully, grasp for any flicker of light, no matter how twisted it may be. The charcoal whispered across the paper, sketching the curve of her jaw. I deliberately avoided her eyes, their intensity too much to bear, focusing instead on the interplay of line and shadow. The studio was so quiet I could hear the soft, abrasive sound of the pencil, like a silkworm chewing on a leaf. Suddenly, she moved. My hand paused, thinking she had grown tired of sitting still. But she only rose to pour a glass of water, then walked over to stand behind me. Her warm breath on the back of my neck made me tense up instantly. "Here," she said, her free hand gesturing toward the paper, her fingertip hovering just over the corner of the eye I had drawn. "The shadow should be deeper here." Her advice was professional, delivered with an air of certainty. Silently, I darkened the shadow as she suggested. She was right. The portrait immediately took on more of her characteristic edge, the sharpness hidden just beneath the beauty. She made a soft sound of approval and held the glass of water to my lips. The gesture was so natural it felt rehearsed. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking a sip from her hand. The warm water soothed my dry throat, but also brought with it an undeniable feeling of submission. When I'd finished the last stroke, I put the pencil down. She picked up the sketch and studied it. "You've made me look too gentle," she remarked, her finger tracing the lips in the portrait, where I had subconsciously given them a slight upward tilt. "That's how you look when you smile," I said quietly, regretting the words as soon as they left my mouth. It sounded like a defense, or worse, a memory. She looked up at me sharply, her eyes dark and deep as ink. "You remember my smile?" Her voice held a strange, pleased tremor. I said nothing. Some memories couldn't be erased, even if they belonged to a past you desperately wanted to forget. She didn't press the issue, just carefully set the drawing aside and took my right hand. The charcoal dust had left a faint smudge on my knuckles. She led me to the small sink in the corner, but instead of turning on the water, she took a soft, damp cloth and began to meticulously clean my fingers. One by one, from thumb to pinky, she wiped away every trace of dust. The cool, damp sensation was strangely intimate. Her focus was so intense, it felt less like cleaning and more like a sacred ritual. When she was done, she didn't let go. Instead, she turned my hand over, palm up, and pressed her cheek against it, a gesture I was beginning to recognize. "Your hands must be clean to touch you," she murmured, her eyes closed. "My things can't have any traces of anyone else on them." The words were soft, but they carried an ironclad possessiveness. Later that afternoon, she brought out a go board. "Play a game with me." It wasn't a question. I knew she was an excellent player. In the past, I had lost to her far more than I'd won. Now, with my mind in turmoil, I had even less interest in the game. My moves were careless. She didn't seem annoyed, but after I made another thoughtless move, she gently placed her hand over mine, stopping me. "Leo," she said, her eyes on the board. "You're not focusing. What does it matter if I lose?" I tried to pull my hand away, but she held it fast. "Losing, of course, has its consequences." She looked up, a faint, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "Unless you're actually looking forward to them." My heart sank. Her consequences were never something to be taken lightly. Reluctantly, I forced myself to study the board. But my mind was a mess, and my defeat was inevitable. When her white stone landed, decisively capturing my last major group, her face lit up with that familiar, satisfying look of control. "You lose," she declared. "What's the consequence?" I asked, wanting to get it over with. She didn't answer. She stood up, walked around the table to my side, and then did something completely natural and utterly disarming. She leaned down and pressed a soft, feather-like kiss to my forehead, right between my eyebrows. It was cool and brief. I froze completely, not because of the kiss itself, but because of what it represented. It wasn't about passion. It was a brand, a silent declaration of ownership, like an animal marking its territory. "That's the consequence," she said, straightening up to look down at me, her expression as content as a well-fed cat. "You're not allowed to wipe it off for the rest of the day." She turned and left the studio, leaving me alone with the empty room and the phantom sensation of a cool fire burning on my forehead. I raised my hand, my fingers hesitating just before they touched my skin. Her command echoed in my ears. This trivial, meaningless punishment was more disempowering than any physical restraint. It was a constant reminder that every part of me, down to the smallest inch of my skin, was under her jurisdiction. At dinner, that invisible mark was still there. I could feel her gaze drift to my forehead from time to time, followed by the slight, satisfied curl of her lips as she placed another piece of food on my plate. "Eat more. You're starting to look healthier," she said, her tone as gentle as if we were the most ordinary, loving couple in the world. The food was tasteless to me. Later, back in the bedroom, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Of course, there was nothing on my forehead. The kiss had left no physical trace. But I felt like something had been branded there, hot, clear, and impossible to ignore. This was a form of imprisonment far more insidious than locked doors. She was using these small, persistent acts to seep her presence, her will, into every space, every moment of my life. The bars of this cage, I realized, were not made of steel, but of a million moments just like this one. Silent but unbreakable. 5 Life flowed on like lukewarm water. The Rose greenhouse became my most frequent haunt. Isabella seemed pleased with my quiet acceptance of the space, even providing me with a set of professional-grade pruning shears, their silver blades glinting coldly in the sunlight. "Try them," she said, placing the shears in my palm, her fingertips brushing against my skin. "They're very obedient." I wasn't sure if she was talking about the shears or me. I picked them up, facing the overgrown rose bushes, but hesitated to make the first cut. She had cared for them so well. Every bloom was a defiant, almost unnaturally vibrant burst of color, a testament to its carefully curated existence. "Can't bring yourself to do it." Her voice came from behind me, laced with an understanding smile. She had approached without a sound. Her warm body was almost flush against my back as her arms wrapped around me from behind, her hands covering mine. "I'll show you," she whispered, her hands guiding mine, aiming the shears at a superfluous side stem. "This one's useless. It just steals nutrients." Her breath ghosted over my ear. "You have to be decisive." Snip! The branch fell to the ground. Her hands lingered, guiding mine to make several more cuts. Her movements were swift, almost ruthless, as if she were trimming away unsightly obstacles rather than tender blooms. I moved passively with her, feeling the cold metal slice through the plant fibers, the subtle vibration traveling from her hands to mine. "See? Much cleaner now, isn't it?" she said, finally releasing me. She looked with satisfaction at the rose bush, which now stood taller, its main flowers more prominent. I stared at the discarded stems on the ground, still green and alive, and felt a strange chill. In her world, anything deemed useless was likely disposed of with the same cool efficiency. After pruning, she led me to a wicker chair in the corner of the greenhouse. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass ceiling, warm and pleasant. She seemed to be in a good mood, even humming a soft, meandering tune. A maid brought tea and pastries. Steam curled from the delicate porcelain cups. She picked up a small, brightly colored macaron and held it to my lips. Its sweet, artificial hue reminded me of the meticulously cultivated roses. I hesitated for a moment before accepting it. An overwhelming sweetness dissolved on my tongue. "Is it sweet?" she asked, her eyes shining as she watched me. I nodded. She smiled and took one for herself, eating it in small, delicate bites. "You used to say these were too sweet," she remarked casually, but the simple statement made the air around us feel heavy. My hand tightened around my teacup. How long ago was that? It felt like a lifetime. Back then, I suppose I still had the right to my own preferences. She didn't dwell on it. instead changing the subject to a new variety of blue hydrangea she had imported for the greenhouse, explaining how sensitive they were to the soil's pH levels and the meticulous care they required. She spoke easily and with genuine interest, as if we were just a normal couple enjoying a quiet afternoon in our garden. This semblance of normalcy was more unsettling than any direct threat. It was like a soft silk veil draped over cold iron chains, lulling you into a false sense of comfort, making you forget you were a prisoner. A few days later, she brought home a cat. It was a beautiful ragdoll with pristine white fur and eyes like blue gems, nestled contentedly in her arms. "Something to keep you company," she said, handing the cat to me. Her tone was light, as if she were giving me a simple gift. I took it instinctively. The cat was light and incredibly soft. It let out a soft meow in my arms and nuzzled against my sleeve. A long-forgotten warmth from the small, furry creature stirred something in me. "Do you like him?" she asked, studying my expression. "Thank you," I said, stroking the cat's silky back. It started to purr. I couldn't deny that in this vast, empty cage, a living, warm creature offered a sliver of comfort. "His name is Ghost," Isabella said, reaching out to gently stroke the cat's head. "He's very quiet. He won't disturb your painting." Over the next few days, Ghost became my silent companion. He would nap quietly at my feet in the studio, stretch languidly in sunbeams, and watch me with his innocent blue eyes. Petting him, feeling the warmth of a living being, sometimes allowed me to momentarily forget my situation. Until one afternoon, I couldn't find him. He was in the studio, the bedroom, or the greenhouse. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach as I searched the areas of the villa I was allowed to access. I finally found him in a half-open storage closet at the end of the hall. He seemed terrified, huddled in a corner with his fur on end, letting out small, distressed cries. As I moved toward him, Isabella's calm voice came from behind me. He was being naughty. He tried to slip out through the ventilation window in the hallway. I turned to see her leaning against the doorframe, her expression unconcerned. "It's drafty out there. He could catch a cold," she said, walking over and effortlessly scooping Ghost into her arms. The cat, though trembling, became immediately docile, even licking her fingers placatingly. "You see," she said, looking up at me, a ghost of smile on her lips. "Now he understands where it's safest and most comfortable for him." She held the cat, stroking its back, her actions both a comfort and a silent warning. Disobedient little things have to learn their lesson the hard way to learn to behave. Her gaze shifted to me, her meaning perfectly clear. "Don't you agree, Leo?" I looked at Ghost, who was slowly calming down in her arms. I looked into his beautiful blue eyes, which now seemed to hold a shadow of fear. A deep chill spread through me. I understood. The cat was never just a companion. It was another prop, another demonstration. She was showing me, not telling me, that obedience would be rewarded with warmth and comfort. But any attempt to escape would be met with cold, lonely punishment. Even this one small, seemingly harmless comfort was just another tool of her control. I watched her turn and walk away, carrying the cat. Sunlight slanted through a window in the hall, stretching her shadow long and thin behind her. I was the frog in the slowly boiling water, and she was patiently, methodically turning up the heat. The incident with Ghost was like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples eventually faded, but the cracks beneath the surface remained. Isabella's behavior toward me became, if possible, even more attentive. She started asking about my minor food preferences. If I took a second helping of a dish, it would invariably appear on the table the next day. The clothes she chose for me were made of softer fabrics, in the pale, muted colors I subconsciously preferred. The inside of my cage was becoming increasingly comfortable, tailored to my every habit, to the point of being surreal. But I knew something had changed. When I looked at Ghost, my feelings were complicated. He was still a sweet, affectionate cat, but whenever I saw his sapphire blue eyes, I would remember him shivering in that dark closet and Isabella's breezy comment about disobedient little things. Isabella seemed to notice the subtle shift in me. She didn't mention it. Instead, one afternoon, she brought a thick photo album. "Look at this," she said, sitting next to me on the sofa and placing the heavy album on my lap. I opened it, Inside were photos of me from my childhood and teenage years. Some I had completely forgotten. Me in a faded, threadbare t-shirt in front of my dilapidated school. Me squatting in an alley, looking at a stray cat. There was even one, a candid shot someone must have taken, of my profile as I doodled in an old textbook. In most of the photos, I looked timid and withdrawn, carrying the gloomy, cautious air of someone raised in a swamp of neglect. It took me a long time to find all of these, Isabella said, her finger gently tapping a photo where I was being shoved by a few blurry figures. Look, this was your life without me. Her voice was soft, almost pitying, but to my ears, it sounded like a cold file scraping away at the past I had tried so hard to bury. The people who bullied you, she continued, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. I took care of them. They won't ever bother you again. Not ever. My fingers, holding the edge of the page, turned white. I knew what her taking care of them meant. A chill snaked up my spine. She wasn't just controlling my present and future. She had reached back and branded my miserable past as her territory, too. From now on, you only need to look at me, she said, closing the album and taking it from my lap. She then cupped my face in her hands, forcing my gaze away from those gray memories and onto her own vibrant, beautiful face. I'm all you need in your world. Her expression was one of intense devotion, as if I were her most precious treasure. But behind that devotion lay a suffocating possessiveness, an act of erasure. She was trying to wipe my entire history clean, leaving only the parts that involved her. After that day, I started having nightmares. Sometimes I was back in that cold foster home, the curses and indifference like physical blows. Other times, I was at the bustling food truck pod, the smell of grilled meat in the air, as Chloe smiled and handed me a taco. But then her face would shatter and reform into Isabella's breathtaking, icy mask. Most often, I dreamed I was sinking in that sunless swamp again, mud filling my nose and mouth, suffocating me. I would struggle, thrashing wildly, only to sink deeper. Then, Isabella would appear on the edge of the swamp, smiling and holding out her hand. But when I took it, it wasn't a rescue. It was just a different kind of trap, one designed to pull me into an eternal darkness completely under her control. I would wake from these dreams drenched in a cold sweat. The room would be quiet and luxurious. The scent of cedar would faint in the air, but the feeling of drowning would linger. I began to avoid looking Isabella in the eye for too long. Her gaze was too deep, like a vortex that threatened to pull me in and make me lose myself completely in the twisted world she was building for us. She noticed my avoidance. One evening, instead of leaving after dinner, she followed me into the bedroom. "You're not sleeping well," she stated, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of fatigue. "I'm fine," I said, turning to look out the window at the pitch-black garden. The silence out there was so profound you could hear your own heartbeat. She came and stood behind me, not touching me, just standing there. "Leo," her voice was unervingly clear in the silence. "Are you afraid of me?" I didn't answer. Was I afraid? Maybe. But it was more than that. A tangled mess of fear, helplessness, and a pathetic, shameful dependency. "You don't have to be." Her voice dropped, taking on a strange, vulnerable quality. "I would never hurt you. Everything I do is just so I don't lose you again." Her words were as light as a feather, but they landed on my heart with the weight of stone. "Look," she said, suddenly stepping in front of me. She was holding a small, pearl-inlaid hand mirror. She held it up so I could see my reflection. "Look closely. Who is standing here with you right now?" In the mirror, I saw my own pale face. And behind me, her chin resting lightly on my shoulder, her cheek pressed against mine. In the reflection, her eyes were dark and intense, locking onto my image in the glass. "It's me, Isabella Sterling," she said, enunciating each word. Her warm breath fanned across my ear. "The person who pulled you out of that mire. The person who gives you warmth, safety, everything." Her arms wrapped around my waist from behind, a gentle but unbreakable hold. "Your life is mine. Your body is mine. And your heart." Her voice was a hypnotic, obsessive whisper. "Can only be mine. Look in the mirror, Leo," she commanded, her voice laced with an undeniable power. "Remember who is with you in this moment. Only me. In the mirror, our two images were fused together, her powerful beauty and my pale submission creating a bizarrely harmonious picture. It was as if she were using the mirror to burn her words, her very existence, deep into my psyche. I stared at myself in the reflection, in my own eyes, among the familiar fear and struggle. There was something new, a creeping, vacant confusion. Satisfied with the dazed look on my face, she gently kissed my earlobe. "Good night, my Leo." She released me and left as quietly as she had come. I remained standing there, the small, cool pearl mirror now in my hand. It reflected my image with perfect clarity. My face seemed even paler than before, and in my eyes, the swamp of my own identity was slowly, gently, but cruelly being filled in and paved over with the cold, unyielding scent of her. 7 days fell into a precise, repetitive pattern. I'd wake at the same time each morning to a soft, warm light. I later realized it was a smart lighting system simulating the sunrise. Isabella was determined to reshape my biological clock, my very perceptions, with these inescapable details. Breakfast was always exquisite and nutritionally balanced. Sometimes she would eat with me, but mostly she just sat across from me, watching silently until I had finished the last bite. Her gaze was no longer the intense, scrutinizing look from the beginning. It had softened into a look of habitual satisfaction, as if watching me obediently consume the food she provided was, in itself, an important daily ritual. Her care had seeped into every pore of my existence. In the art studio, paints and canvases were always fully stocked. If I used more of a particular color, several new tubes of it would appear the next day. The greenhouse roses, after my first pruning session, became my designated task. But whenever I worked on them, she was usually nearby, keeping me company, either reading in a wicker chair or simply watching, ensuring my every move met her approval. I barely needed to speak anymore. A glance at an empty water glass would result in a fresh one, at the perfect temperature, being placed in my hand. A lingering look at a certain dish at dinner meant it would likely reappear the next day, perhaps in an even more elaborate form. I grew accustomed to this silent, perfect provision, accustomed to the ever-present scent of cedarwood, accustomed to drawing a new portrait of her every day, watching her sit as the sole, eternal subject of my art, accustomed to her "good night, my Leo," at my bedroom door, a phrase that was both a gentle wish and an indisputable claim of ownership. This habit was like warm water, like soft silk. It wrapped around me, so quietly that I found myself lowering my guard without even realizing it. Sometimes I would zone out while painting, staring at the perfectly manicured, unrealistically beautiful view outside the window, and a thought would drift through my mind. Maybe this isn't so bad. There is no abuse or hunger like in my childhood, no desperate struggle for survival, no groveling for scraps of affection. She had given me a twisted, but very real, form of peace. The Leo who tried to escape, the one who ate tacos at a food truck pod and sought fleeting warmth from a stranger, felt like a character from another life, hazy and unreal. Then, one afternoon, Isabella brought an old-fashioned record player into the studio. The vinyl spun slowly, filling the room with the soothing strains of classical music. "A little sound might be nice," she said, adjusting the volume. The music seemed to soften the lines of her face. I did, in fact, prefer to have background music while I worked. Another one of my old habits that she either remembered or had uncovered. The music filled the silence, and the hand holding my pencil seemed to relax. Today, she didn't pose for me. She sat on the sofa with a book. We existed in the same space, each absorbed in our own activity, the music a gentle current flowing between us. This almost normal moment of coexistence created a dangerous illusion of peace. As I focused on the canvas, I subconsciously started to hum a few off-key notes along with the melody. I didn't even notice I was doing it until I heard the soft sound of a book closing. I stopped, looking over at her. She had put her book down and was just watching me, her expression something I had never seen before. It wasn't the usual possessiveness or the occasional vulnerability. It was a complex light, a mixture of profound surprise, deep satisfaction, and even a flicker of what looked like being genuinely moved. She stood up and walked slowly toward me. The music played on. Her steps were light, but they seemed to land in time with my own heartbeat. She stopped in front of me, not touching me, just looking deep into my eyes, as if trying to see into my soul. "You were humming," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, but her lips couldn't help but curve into a real, radiant smile. "Lau, you were just humming." I was stunned, only then realizing what I had done. In her obsessive world, this tiny, unconscious action held immense significance. It signified relaxation. It signified comfort. It signified my acceptance of this environment, of the world she had built for me. To her, this was a greater victory than putting me in physical chains. "I'm so happy," she said. Her eyes seemed to glisten, but she blinked quickly, forcing back any trace of tears. She reached out, but this time, she didn't grab my chin or cut my face. She simply, gently, with an almost reverent touch, let her fingertips graze the back of the hand I held my pencil with. The touch was brief, but it felt searingly hot. "Truly, so happy," she repeated, her smile growing wider. It was a pure, unclouded joy that radiated from within. Seeing that smile, a wave of profound dread and panic washed over me. I understood. My unconscious relaxation, my developing habits, my subtle adaptation to life in this cage. All of it, in her eyes, was not a surrender. It was a sign of her triumph. It was proof that the intricate web she had woven was working, that her prey was finally settling into its capture. She was savoring this process, savoring every moment of my journey from struggle to silence, from silence to habit, and now to the first flicker of belonging. The weight of habit, I realized, was heavier than I ever could have imagined. It was silently melting me down, reforging the person named Leo Hayes into a permanent fixture of the eternal prison named Isabella Sterling. And she was absolutely ecstatic about her success. After the incident with the record player, Isabella's mood was consistently, noticeably euphoric. Her gaze, while still possessive, now held a layer of indulgent affection. She started bringing me more things, not expensive luxuries, but small, personal items. An old fountain pen with a slightly scratched barrel that she said she used as a child. A book of poetry with dog-eared pages, as if it had been read many times. Even a small orchid she had potted herself, a notoriously difficult flower to bloom. "To liven up your studio," she said, placing the orchid on the windowsill. These objects began to fill the cold cage with a more tangible sense of Isabella. She was embedding fragments of her life into my space, deliberately blurring the lines between us. I accepted it all in silence. The feeling of being a frog in slowly boiling water had drained me of the will to resist. In this hermetically sealed world, resistance was a futile, laughable gesture. I began spending more time in the studio, not always painting. Sometimes I would just stare at the orchid or idly flip through the poetry book. It was filled with her elegant, handwritten notes in the margins. Looking at them, I would sometimes wonder if this obsessive, terrifying woman had ever had a normal girlhood, a time when she just sat quietly and read a book. I would immediately crush the thought. I couldn't afford to feel any curiosity or empathy for her. That would be the beginning of the end. One day, Isabella had to leave to handle some urgent family business. The villa felt strangely light and quiet without her constant presence. I sat in the studio, the sun shining brightly outside. Ghost was napping at my feet, and the record player was spinning a gentle piano sonata. It was the picture of the piece she had designed for me. My gaze drifted to a wicker basket in the corner where I kept old sketches. It was mostly filled with drafts of her portrait and a few still lifes. On a strange impulse, I walked over, knelt down, and started rummaging through them. At the very bottom, my fingers touched a piece of paper with a different texture. I pulled it out. It was an old, faded photograph. The photo was of a teenage boy in a worn-out school uniform, sitting alone on the bleachers of an empty athletic field. His head was down, his bangs hiding his eyes, and his entire posture radiated a lonely, melancholic aura that was far too old for his years. It was me. It was me at my lowest, in the deepest part of the swamp, in my truest form from that time. My hand, holding the photo, trembled. Where did she get this? And why was it hidden with my drawings? My heart slammed against my ribs. A bitter, humiliating feeling washed over me. I had thought she'd merely investigated my past. I never imagined she possessed such a clear, tangible record of a moment I myself had tried to burn from my memory. Looking at the pathetic, timid boy in the photo, a boy who looked like he'd been abandoned by the entire world, and then thinking of the man I was now, dressed in soft clothes in a luxurious cage, I was overcome by a sense of profound, tearing absurdity. I had escaped a swamp of poverty only to fall into a swamp of the soul. And both versions of me were held firmly in the palm of the same person. Just then, Ghost stirred at my feet, his ears perking up toward the door. I quickly shoved the photo back to the bottom of the basket and stood up just as the studio door opened. Isabella was back. She looked a little tired from her work, but the moment she saw me, that fatigue was replaced by a soft glow. Her eyes swept over me, the orchid, the cat, the music, and then returned to my face. "I'm back," she said, walking over and giving me a brief, gentle hug, like a wife returning home from work. She smelled of the cool outside air mixed with her signature scent. The embrace was light, but it made my whole body go stiff. She sensed it. She pulled back and studied my face. "What's wrong? You look pale." Her eyes sharpened, becoming analytical. "Nothing," I said, looking down. "Just a little tired, maybe." She was silent for a moment, her gaze so heavy it felt like a physical weight. I struggled to maintain a calm exterior, terrified she would sense something was off, that she would know I had seen the photo. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, she seemed to accept my explanation. Her voice softened. "Then you should rest. Don't draw anymore." She reached out and smoothed my collar, which wasn't even wrinkled. "What would you like for dinner? I'll have the kitchen prepare it." "Anything is fine," I mumbled. She smiled faintly and left the studio. I let out a slow breath. My back was damp with a cold sweat. In that moment, I had been afraid. Afraid she would discover I'd seen the photo. Afraid her sharp intuition would see through to the complex, churning emotions inside me that I couldn't even understand myself. I walked to the window and looked down into the garden, where she was now speaking to the butler. The sun outlined her slender, powerful silhouette. That old photograph was like a cracked mirror, suddenly held up to show me the truth of my situation, the pathetic state of a soul that was being slowly, methodically ground down. I thought I had grown accustomed to the warm water, but that one small glimpse of my past self was enough to remind me, with a jolt, that I had almost forgotten what real sunlight felt like, what free air tasted like. The thing I called myself, which I thought had been drowned, had managed to release one tiny, desperate bubble from the depths. And then, just as quickly, it sank back into the silence. The old photograph was like a rusty nail driven into the smooth surface of my life. Isabella became even more meticulous in her care, going so far as to ask which scented soaps I preferred after my bath, remarking that a certain woodsy scent suited my current tranquil disposition. It felt like she was trying to smother any unwelcome thoughts with an inescapable blanket of consideration. I didn't look at the photo again. I deliberately avoided the wicker basket. But once you've seen something like that, you can't unsee it. The cold, muddy smell of my childhood swamp would occasionally seep through the layers of luxury and warmth, catching me off guard. I started having trouble sleeping. Lying next to Isabella, listening to her steady breathing, feeling the weight of her arm draped possessively over my waist, even in her sleep, I would stare into the darkness until the sky began to lighten. The feeling of being completely surrounded, with no possible escape, was magnified tenfold in the dead of night. She noticed. "Still not sleeping well?" she asked one morning, propped up on her elbow and studying my face. There was genuine concern in her eyes, not feigned. She traced the faint shadows under my eyes with her finger. "You look worse than you did a few days ago. It's probably just." Taking time to adjust, I offered lamely. She looked at me for a long moment, then let it go. "Come with me somewhere tonight," she said softly. I didn't ask where. My consent was never a factor here. That evening, she led me not to the garage, but up to the top floor of the villa. She pushed open a heavy wooden door, and the view opened up before us. It was a massive observatory with a retractable glass dome. The night sky was a deep, velvety blue, littered with brilliant stars. A hazy ribbon of the Milky Way stretched across the heavens. The cool night air, carrying the scent of the forest, was refreshing. In the center of the space were comfortable lounge chairs on a thick wool rug, a small table set with hot tea and snacks. "Lie down," she said, leading me to a chair and settling into the one next to me. "Look." I leaned back and looked up. The immense, unobstructed cosmos rushed down to meet me. The sheer scale and depth of it stole my breath. After so long in the light-polluted haze of cities, I had forgotten how truly stunning the night sky could be. When I was little, Isabella's voice was unusually soft, colored with a rare nostalgia. Whenever I couldn't sleep, my nanny would bring me to our family's observatory. She used to say that if you look at the stars, you realize how small you are, and your troubles don't seem so big anymore. I glanced at her. The starlight softened the usual sharp lines of her face. For a moment, she didn't look like an obsessive tyrant, but just a girl looking at the stars. I later realized she was wrong, Isabella said, turning to look at me, her eyes shining in the starlight. Looking at them only makes me feel that in a universe this vast, there's so little I can truly hold on to, which is why, her gaze locked onto mine, I can never, ever let go of what I do have. My heart sank. Even this breathtaking, romantic view was just another backdrop for her to declare her ownership. "See that one?" She pointed to a particularly bright, reddish star. Mars. The ancients called it the baffling luminary. It represented war, disaster, and unpredictable variables. Her fingers seemed to touch the distant planet in the empty air. "I don't like variables." Her tone was light, but the finality in it was chilling. "Leo," she said, taking my hand in hers, her fingertips cool. "You are my star. You must remain in the orbit I have set for you, eternally." And she added, "It is the only orbit you are allowed to have." The stars were beautiful. The night air was perfect, but her words were more imprisoning than any steel bars. She could twist the very grandeur of the universe into a footnote for her possessiveness. We lay there in silence for a while, the stars twinkling soundlessly above. Under the weight of this immense, silent beauty, the turmoil stirred up by that old photograph did start to feel insignificant. Not because I was at peace, but because I felt a deeper sense of powerlessness. In the vast web of control she had woven, one that could apparently encompass the entire cosmos. Where could my tiny self possibly escape to? "Are you cold?" she asked, pulling a soft wool blanket over both of us. It carried her scent. I shook my head. She turned on her side to face me, studying my features in the starlight. Then she did something unexpected. She reached up and, with the very tip of her finger, gently traced the line of my eyebrow. "Sleep," she whispered, her voice low and strangely hypnotic. "I'm right here." As if under a spell, the exhaustion from nights of insomnia washed over me. The peaceful stars, the cool air. I slowly closed my eyes. As I drifted off, I could feel her gaze still on me, her hand holding mine, and the entire universe seeming to shrink to the confines of this glass dome. And she was the sole ruler of this domain. I was a ship lost in a vast, starry sea, and her gravity was the only direction I knew. 10 after that night, under the stars, something seemed to settle within me. My insomnia vanished. Perhaps the starlight had exhausted the last of my will to fight. I became unervingly quiet. I no longer stared blankly at canvases for hours, no longer avoided Isabella's gaze. When she made decisions about my daily life, I would offer a faint, almost compliant nod. Isabella saw this transformation, and the satisfaction in her eyes deepened, like a gardener whose prized rose has finally bloomed in the exact shade she desired. She began to grant me slightly more freedom within the villa's confines. I could walk alone in the garden for longer periods, or spend an entire afternoon in the library without her supervision. The library was immense, with floor-to-ceiling shelves that smelled of wood and old paper. I wandered between the stacks, my fingers brushing against the spines of books, new and old. The collection was vast, from dense academic texts to popular fiction, a miniature world. But I knew this world, too, was meticulously curated by her. Every book on these shelves had to meet her standards, or at least contain no ideas that might spark dangerous thoughts. I pulled out a large illustrated book on bird migration and sat in a plush armchair by the window. On the glossy pages, flocks of birds soared across continents, following an instinct for warmth and survival. It was a freedom so deeply ingrained in their DNA that it could not be caged. As I read, I heard soft footsteps. Isabella approached, carrying a glass of warm milk, which she placed on the table beside me. Her eyes fell on the open page, a picture of geese in flight. "Do you like birds?" she asked casually, sitting down next to me, bringing her familiar cool scent with her. "Just browsing," I said, closing the book and picking up the milk. It was the perfect temperature. She didn't press. She picked up the book herself and flipped through a few pages. "Migration is a difficult journey," she commented, her voice flat. "Predators, harsh weather, the risk of getting lost. Often, they fly thousands of miles only to trade one hardship for another." She looked up at me. "It's better to have a safe nest. One where it's always spring, where there's plenty of food and no danger." She placed the book back on the table. "Don't you think so, Leo?" she asked, her gaze gentle but all-knowing. I looked down and drank my milk without answering. The warm liquid was a false comfort. She had a way of twisting any flicker of longing for freedom into a foolish, dangerous impulse. A few days later, she gave me a bird. It was a canary, its feathers a brilliant yellow, its song a sweet melody. It was housed in an exquisite golden cage, which she hung by the window in my studio. "Give him a name," she said, her tone bright as she poked a finger through the bars. I looked at the little creature, hopping back and forth in its confined space, chirping brightly. It had feathers the color of sunshine, but would never feel the real sun on its wings. "Let's call him Sunshine," I said. Isabella smiled, seeming pleased with the name. "Sunshine. He'll be here to keep you company, always." And so, a splash of vibrant color and a constant, cheerful song were added to the studio. Sunshine would sing while I painted and watch me with his curious, black bead eyes when I rested. Isabella would often come in to change his water and food herself, her movements gentle and practiced. The way she looked at the canary was identical to the way she looked at me, with the tender, proprietary affection one has for a cherished possession. One afternoon, I finished a painting and stood up to stretch my stiff neck. My gaze fell on the cage. Sunshine was happily pecking at the seeds in his dish. Isabella had entered without me noticing and was standing beside me, also watching the bird. "He's happy, isn't he?" she murmured, as if to herself. "He doesn't have to struggle to survive, doesn't have to worry about storms or predators. All he has to do is enjoy the best care and sing his songs." She turned her head to look at me, her eyes filled with a deep, bottomless tenderness. "You see, Leo, this is the best life for him. He wouldn't survive outside of this cage." Her fingertip gently tapped the golden bars. The canary fluttered its wings in alarm, then quickly settled down and went back to its seeds. "You're the same," she said, her voice low and certain, filled with a sense of finality. "Only here, by my side, can you find true peace and quiet. The outside world, it doesn't belong to you, and it isn't suited for you." She reached out, but instead of touching the cage, she took my hand. Her palm was warm, but her grip was inescapable. "We've been home for a long time now," she smiled, her eyes reflecting me and the window behind me, yet seeming to have room for nothing else. "You're finally completely back." I stared at the spot of bright, yellow hopping in the cage, listened to its carefree chirping, and felt the warmth and strength of her hand holding mine. The swamp inside me, the one that had struggled for so long, finally seemed to go still, filled in with the heavy, suffocating sediment of habit. Outside the window, the sky was a brilliant blue, with white clouds drifting lazily by, and I knew that that sky had nothing to do with me anymore.